Previously, we looked at operating leverage, and we described mathematically the level of operating leverage using a metric called the degree of operating leverage. For financial leverage, we're going to do something very similar. We're going to introduce a concept, mathematical concept, degree of financial leverage. If you'll recall, the degree of operating leverage was the percent change in operating income divided by the percent change in units. The degree of financial leverage that we're presenting here is the percent change in earnings per share divided by the percent change in EBIT. Now, EBIT is the same thing as operating income. So the denominator in degree of financial leverage was the numerator in the degree of operating leverage. For computation purposes, we can restate this as for any given earnings before interest and taxes, for any given operating income level, the degree of financial leverage is the operating income divided by the operating income minus the interest expense. So EBIT divided by EBIT minus I being the interest expense. To operationalize this and give us an example, let's go back to our previous description of various potential operating income levels, and we'll focus on this guy right here where we had $36,000 in operating income. In Plan A, we had $12,000 in interest expense. In Plan B, we had $4,000 in interest expense. Okay, so let's look at what impact that has. Obviously, the $12,000 interest expense firm is more highly levered, has greater financial leverage. If we apply the formula here for degree of financial leverage, equals EBIT, which is $36,000, divided by EBIT minus the interest cost, 36 minus 12. Then 36,000 divided by 24,000 is equal to 1.5. So this is our degree of financial leverage. For our other firm, which was more conservatively financed, we only had $4,000 in interest expense. EBIT's exactly the same, 36,000 operating income in both cases. So now we have a degree of financial leverage which is 36,000 divided by 32,000, or 1.1. So we see here, when we make a comparison between these two, our more levered firm has more interest expense, has a degree of financial leverage of 1.5. Our more conservative firm has a degree of financial leverage of 1.1. So we mathematically have a description of how much financial leverage the firm actually employs. Now, given that we've discussed the range, it might appear at least that given the range of operating income levels that we've seen, that financial leverage is almost always a good thing, that there were only a few instances where things were bad. But this need not be the case. For one thing, we could have taken on more debt, and that would have caused even bigger problems in our poor operating environment. Beyond some point, debt financing becomes detrimental to the firm, and that's because for a couple of reasons. One, as we add more debt, lenders are going to perceive there's greater risk that they may not be paid back. They're going to charge a higher interest rate. As the interest rate goes up, we know that we have to earn a return on assets at least equal to the interest rate before financial leverage is paying off for us. So that's one problem. There's going to be a higher cost of interest as we begin to borrow more and more money. And we've assumed that away in the presentation we've seen previously. Likewise, there's some risk to the common stockholders when there's more leverage. The reason for that is if we have a particularly poor operating environment and we find ourselves unable to make our interest payments, we may go bankrupt. If we go bankrupt, even if in the long run we were better off with more debt, there may not be a long run. The company may go out of business before we get to enjoy the benefits of that financial leverage. The shareholders recognize this, and therefore they're willing to pay less for the shares, so the cost of equity to us will end up going up. But another way of thinking about it is just the price of our shares is going to go down. So it turns out that when we add a lot of leverage, a lot of financial leverage to our firm, the cost of borrowing goes up. Likewise, the value of our stock is going down. Shareholders obviously don't want that. They want us to pursue a path that maximizes the value of their stock. With these limitations in mind, for the most part, the firms that should be using significant amounts of financial leverage are firms that have fairly strong operating performance. So firms that are operating in an environment that they're going to be able to produce returns, positive returns, in a lot of different under a lot of different scenarios. The odds of ending up in that bad situation where they can't cover their interest payments are fairly small. So that's the sort of firm that would want to use financial leverage. If the industry is fairly stable and therefore the firm is very stable, that's a good thing as well. And firms that are in a positive stage of growth are more likely to be interested in using leverage than firms that have potential hardships that the company is going to be encountering.